Chase Mila Falche, which means in Gaelic 100,000 welcomes.
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
History is a nightmare from which one must awaken.
Hello again, and you're very welcome back to Deep Diving with myself, Malachy Murray. Well, I won't lie to you folks. I'm in celebratory mood this evening as we celebrate our 5th episode here on Deep Diving. Drink it in. And we're celebrating because we haven't got one strike for going against community guidelines from any of the social media networks. And that's something we're very proud of here on Deep Diving because we don't want to upset the overlords that now dictate and control our lives. Anywho, it's time to bring back my young friend from the west of Ireland, and his name is the reincarnated Druid, Mr. Balor O'Brien, ladies and gentlemen. Balor, are you there, sir? Balor O'Brien, come in, sir. Hello. There he is. Come on.
Sorry. Yes, sorry, I'm here.
Yes. Well, it looks like we've interrupted you. Have you been doing something there? You don't have your cloak on.
To be honest with you, yes, I couldn't find it, Malachy. I lost track of the days this week. I was out. I suppose I was out on a spiritual journey for the last number of days and completely lost track of time. And you've just caught me at the end of a ritual. So apologies for my appearance.
Right. Okay. You've nothing to put on you then. We just, it's a family show. There's
I think you can crop off. You can crop the bottom half of me anyway. So it should be.
Okay. We just don't want people coming in here for the wrong reasons. Lonely old ladies and all that kind of thing. Anywho, I do digress. Balor, please explain what that tattoo is. I see some drawing there on your left pec. Could you describe what that is? Could you just move it over slightly away from your candle? Don't burn your nipple. No, put back a bit. There you go. Okay. That looks like some sort of a leprechaun, fighting Irish leprechaun you have there.
No, it isn't. It's a tattoo that I had designed several years ago. It was originally supposed to be branded, but unfortunately the artist refused to do that, so we had to settle for ink. But it is the creature. It's a lesser known cousin of the leprechaun called the clurachaun. So it was kind of like a similar species that how would you describe them? They were the ones who were fond of the drink. I think the Americans have confused leprechauns and clurachauns, but the clurachauns were the ones who would stay in your wine cellar, and if you interfered with them, they would cause all sorts of mischief in your house. But if you allowed them a kind of a certain quantity of your supply, they would bring you good fortune. And typically they rode on goats or sheep, which is why this fella is sitting on one.
He's sitting on a sheep on your left pec, and he's a troublesome cousin of a leprechaun. Have I taken all the information in there and relayed it correctly, sir?
I think you have, yeah. I mean, the only other thing is he has the 4 most powerful objects of the Two-Headed Danann. He has the stone, he has the sword, he has the spear, and he has the well, actually can't remember what the other one is.
That's okay. Well, you are Balor, and you represent the bad guy in the Tuatha Dé Danann story, and this leprechaun is a mischievous creature. What, sir, are you drinking to you mind? You don't normally have a tipple for our conversation.
Well, I'm just finishing what I had earlier. So it's a concoction of my own. It's quite complex to explain it, but I'll be sure to send you a bottle when we've the next batch ready.
Okay, well, just send me a sample first, I wouldn't want you to waste it all. So Balor, tell me more about these ceremonies that you have. What is it about these spiritual ceremonies that makes you want to take your clothes off?
Sometimes you need your clothes for the ceremonies, and sometimes it's very, very important to not have your clothes on. It's dependent on what we are doing.
Like having a shower.
Yes, like having a shower. Like many rituals will involve fluids. You might be down by the river or lakes or by the sea. Again, it depends on the ritual, and water can be a very purifying element, as can fire. So often both are incorporated into the rituals.
The fire, the water, the naked, soggy, burning flesh. It sounds so intriguing. And that candle, what does that represent to you on a night like this? The simple flame as you look downward with your purple face paint and white face mask and mad hair. What does the candle say to you, sir?
Well, the candle says, be careful not to burn your mask. And I suppose what it represents to me is for spring, the arrival of spring. But the flame for me is eternal. Like, this represents the eternal flame. And no matter what season we're in, I look at, I suppose, the flame of hope, and it's the flame of destruction and creation, and I mean, it's everything.
We are now in the depths of the spring equinox, the equal amount of night and day in our 24-hour cycles. What should we be concentrating on during the equinox? Should we be looking backwards toward the winter and saying, thank God that's over? Or should we be looking forward to the summer and finally being allowed to walk outside without being arrested?
I think we need to look forward to everything. Even if you're within your 5 kilometers, at least when you can get out when the weather is more agreeable, we can get out more, and the days are extending, thankfully, so there's more time to spend in nature. And of course, spring is a beautiful time. You have the return of many animals and creatures coming out of hibernation, and of course the fruits and the flowers are going to be coming soon. So loads to be grateful and looking forward to, whether or not lockdowns continue. And if you know of a fairy fort near you, or a standalone hawthorn bush, we can maybe at some stage organize training for people that they may use these to travel to the other world, because as far as I know, there are no restrictions or lockdowns in the other world at present. The coronavirus hasn't seemed to be able to reach there yet.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that's great news for anyone that is thinking about doing some sort of naked ritual around a tree in the near future. And when it comes to that, Balor, is it purely a leap into the unknown, or is there something more physical, more deep, more sensual about being naked around a tree?
Around a tree specifically?
around a fairy fort, around something natural.
Yeah, it's incredibly liberating. I'm sure. Have you not at some stage done it, Malachy, in your youth or on a night out? I suppose torn everything off and just dived into the dived into the sea, or gone exploring into the woods.
A gentleman never reveals his deep, dark secrets, and let that be a lesson to all of you out there. You're never going to find out what I got up to in my youth. The number 3 is very, very important in Irish legend. I see the triangular kind of a symbol here on your just next to your eye. That's it there. Yes. Yes. So when you are naked in a field, are you 3 as well when you're standing there, or are you 2.5?
I suppose the I don't know what kind of answer you would like me to give you, Malachy.
It's just
have
curious,
many that come to mind.
Literally just curious, because I'm sure people are thinking about that as we speak. Anyway, we have digressed so much that we've come full circle, and we're coming back to a topic that is very, very important to many people out there. We now live in some sort of dystopian nightmare where rules are made up by the day and your individual freedoms are being flitted away like leaves falling off a tree in autumn. But what of the old laws of this country? I am, of course, referring to the Brehon Laws, and this is something that you know much about, Balor. Is that not true, sir?
Yes. I think that the Brehon Laws were absolutely amazing. I've had great experience with them in the past, and I think it is a travesty that we don't have them today. I think a lot of the laws that have been used to replace them have been big steps backwards.
So when did they start on this land? Do we know that, or have they been here time immemorial?
They go back thousands of years, as far as we can tell. The second oldest legal system that was, I suppose, written down or that is recorded is Brehon Law. So it's very, very old. It may be the oldest, and it just took that long for someone to write it down, or the original I suppose the original copies of it were destroyed. So it's impossible to say definitively, but it is incredibly, incredibly old.
They were passed down from the Druid classes. Would that be correct in me saying that?
Yeah, they were, I suppose, they were a part of Celtic culture, pagan Celtic culture in Ireland, and they were the system of laws that people live their lives by. And what was very interesting about it was there wasn't this need for a police force or kind of these kind of structures that are in place today, because the society just, I suppose, accepted it. You know, these communities accepted the rule of law, and when there was disagreements, they were able to get the judges, the mobile judges, to pass judgment, and they weren't restricted but to. They had an input on who the judge would be, so they had considerable more respect, I would say, for the law, and a much more, I suppose, understanding of what it meant to them, because it was something that was kind of shared in the community.
Absolutely wonderful. So tell us, what examples do we have of Brehon laws, and could we think about bringing them back into today's society to make it a more just and equitable system here?
Well, some of the laws, because of the changes in our world, technological advances, and I suppose, abandoning certain traditions. We would have to reshape them to a certain degree, but there are many, many laws that you could bring back, and they would be perfectly suitable today. One interesting law that I came across was to do with husband and wife, that they could walk away from the marriage on the 1st of February. So despite hundreds of years of, I suppose, teachings from the church that I suppose divorce wouldn't be allowed, and it having such a big effect for generations in Ireland, it's interesting that all this time ago, and for a very, very, very long time, people had this kind of specific date used, and there was there's no knowledge why that was the date that they chose.
St. Bridget's Day, no?
It's possible. It's possible that it was to do with Uncalach going back to sleep, and St. Bridget awakening, kind of symbolizing spring. But that's not that, that is only a theory, and people can argue the dates on when Uncalach awakens, and they can do the same for Bridget. So it's totally up to you which one you believe.
Was it seen as a woman's liberation movement on the 1st of February, celebrating St. Bridget, for the lady to hop, skip, and jump into the bed of the local farmhand?
We certainly wouldn't. We wouldn't. I suppose, put that kind of emphasis on it. But for sure, there was more liberties and more freedom for people to walk away from a marriage and enjoy their newfound, I suppose, single life with a farm boy or a druid or a doctor or whoever else they might choose.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Local Chippendale, maybe, getting back to the nakedness of yourself there. Sorry, I just can't get that out of my head. So, other Brehon laws that you have encountered yourself, because I know you have very vivid memories from past lives on this island, living through pagan times as a druid yourself. So, what was your direct involvement with the Brehon laws at the time?
Well, I mean, we all have that older uncle or grandfather, and one that I noticed over the centuries was that it was quite frustrating, is that if you have an elderly relative, you are required to provide them with one oat cake per day and a portion of sour milk. So it was quite kind of inconvenient when you had elderly relatives living for 30, 40 years, where every single day you're baking them an oat cake, you have to deliver it to them. So you can't go to the beach in Lahinch or down in Cork. You're kind of stuck because you have to give them the oat cake every day, and you couldn't just bake a batch and give them a month's supply. You had to bake it every friggin' day. So that could grow tiresome.
Sounds like early purgatory there. And what about the sour milk? Was that to piss him off?
It was just because we didn't have fridges, so it was easier to say sour milk than fridge milk or fresh milk, because you'd pretty much have to be squirting the milk out straight from the cow or the goat straight into his gob if you wanted fresh.
Something mildly pornographic about that.
I don't know what's...
So other Brehon laws that you have directly encountered yourself, did you actually enforce any of these laws on the lay people of the time that you were a druid in the society in a past life?
So I always avoided being involved in that type of thing. it was, I suppose, preferable to not be the decision maker in such matters. But I do know some people who had some unfortunate cases they had to rule on. For example, there was one law in regards to husband and wife, and if the wife was pregnant and the husband refused to, if she had a craving for sour milk, for example, and the husband declined to fulfill her request, he could be fined. He would be fined for refusing to accommodate his wife and her needs when she's pregnant.
Well, what if they didn't have a cow or a goat for him to squirt the milk into her mouth?
Well, I think it would have to be kind of improvised, and I'll leave that to your imagination.
Right. Yes, yes, very confusing as well, some of these laws, and probably hard to implement now, seeing as people really don't have farm animals to hand as much as they used to back in the day. So Brehon laws overall are seen as quite silly to some people now, but they did make a lot of sense at the time. And there was a democratic process in which there wasn't a centralized government dictating what the laws of the land were. It was more an agreement among local communities. And did those communities have different laws depending where they were in the country?
Yeah, I mean, much like there is today, certain laws would have they'd be dependent on local circumstances or local situations. I mean, when they talk about Brehon laws, they talk about the price of land, and they say that the price was for the best arable land was 24 cows, and for the kind of, I suppose, dry crappy land, it would have been 12 dry cows was the price. But I'm sure there had to be more specific measurements about that, as you'd have, varying degrees of the best land depending on whether you're talking about the Burren, or if you're talking about Tipperary South, or if you're talking about West Cork. So it would probably vary depending on the area. But I am still gathering my information on this, but from what I've learned so far, it appears to be the case.
When you mentioned the 24 cows, it reminds me of the time myself and her indoors traveled to Tunisia, and we were walking down a thoroughfare where the locals were selling some livestock. There was a gentleman who was at a stall, and as we walked past him, he beckoned me over. He said, Sir, please, I buy your wife for 6 camels. Well, I laughed and laughed and laughed at the thoughts of this. My wife wasn't too impressed and wanted us to keep walking along, but I was having too much fun with this man. And I replied to him, "She's yours for 9. To which he replied, "No, she's not worth 9. Lovely memory there. Back to you, Bala. Any more Brehon laws?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of them. I mean, we could talk about the punish. Well, there was another fine that men were subject to in the event that they didn't go to bed with their wives through listlessness. So your wife could, I suppose, bring you to the court, and you'd be fined, or bring you to the local Brehon, and you'd be fined.
Listlessness. Could you describe what that is for our less educated viewers out there, of which there are a few?
Listlessness would be possibly that he was not interested in having relations with his wife. It may also be that it may be the case that it's assumed that if a man wasn't interested in his wife, it may be because he was getting his exercise elsewhere and therefore listless when he came home. So that may have been why they incurred a heavy fine on such men.
Possibly referring to the farmyard animals once again there. Yes, yes. But again, probably fair in the overall scheme of things. If there were problems in that area, it's fairly taboo now, whereas back then it was openly discussed with the local Brehon man, and he came in and fixed it up for them.
It's possible. It's possible, Malachy.
That wasn't you then. No, you didn't interfere in that way.
I did at one point have a wife who, true, as I say, it may be the case that there was listlessness for various reasons, and one of which could have been a wandering eye. Now, I suppose it's possible that in a previous iteration, Balor had to pay some similar fine, but thankfully there's no records of this.
Okay, it was worth it, I presume.
I think we have to move on, Malachy.
Okay. Any more Brehon laws that spring to mind before we get into the juicy bits of Balor's private eye?
Yes, actually, one of my favorite ones was actually to do with hospitality. It was very, very important to show kindness to strangers. And so there was a law that anyone who arrives at your door, you were required to feed and, I suppose, care for them. You couldn't turn anyone away at your door. So it was, there was other laws around food. You couldn't give food to someone if a dead mouse or a weasel had been found beside it. But so you'd have to look at those types of laws as well, in conjunction with always feeding a guest in your house. And there's many the time that a fairy or a she or a banshee arrived at someone's house, and they were obligated to open their doors and welcome them in and feed them. And often what happened was, if they were obeying the law, they were rewarded with good fortune in some form by the fairies. And if they turned them away, and if they broke the law, they were punished. They would have seen some sort of misfortune or death in the family, and or even a disappearance. Those weren't uncommon either. So it's possible that the Brehon law actually came from what was already enforced between fairies and humans, this expectation.
Well, what we do is, if we see someone coming toward the house that we don't want to talk to, we switch off all the lights, we run into a back room and stay as quiet as possible. And that usually works. If we did that back in the day, do you think we could have been cursed?
Well, you could have misfortune now if you still do it. I mean, I've heard of, at the very least, I've heard of children egging a house for something similar. And
well, I could put up with that, to be fair, because if you spend literally 10 minutes in this person's company, you would want to end it all. And I don't say that lightly. Anyway, We are digressing so much, and I do believe it is time, ladies and gentlemen, for your favorite gossip from your favorite reincarnated druid. Yes, it's time for Barlo's Private Eye. Take it away, sir.
Okay, so I suppose when I was last speaking to everyone, I was talking to you about...
I've got to go for a top-up. I'll be back.
See you in a bit, Malachy. Okay, so I was talking to you all last week about Ben. He reappeared, and he's been laying low for the last few days. I haven't seen or heard anything from him. I haven't been able to spot him, so I don't know if he's been staying hidden at home or if he is gone away somewhere. But I did come across an unusual story this week. It was actually on St. Patrick's Day. So obviously we are all in lockdown and we are restricted to our homes. But it was a close, someone very close to me. It was their birthday. So we had a very small social distance gathering. And basically the garden where we were was in front of a graveyard in Ennis, and it is a graveyard that isn't really in use anymore. And it's a very strange place because it is actually, the graveyard is a hill, but all the land in every direction around it is completely flat. So what happened was I spotted a couple of people over the wall inside the graveyard, and when I was out in the garden, and my interest was piqued because they were just looking very, very suspicious. And by that I mean normally it is teenagers drinking in the graveyard and smoking. So when it wasn't teenagers, I was immediately interested because it's very seldom someone else will be in there. And so I kind of climbed up a tree, climbed over the wall into the graveyard, and I hid behind a couple of tombstones and kind of gradually creeped my way forward. And this is, I suppose, the conversation that I overheard. It was to do with, it was basically to do with wasps and honeybees, strangely enough. Because it was two gentlemen. One of them I think we had last week mentioned was Sev, and the other one was actually he said his name. The name I understood was Pine, but I don't know if that was a nickname, a first name, a surname. But this gentleman Pine was talking about how he had been out nearby the I suppose the floodplains behind the graveyard, and he had been chased by some bees. Now it's unusual this time of year that there would be so many. He thought there might be a nest nearby, and as I say, he was chased away. But he had mentioned to Sev on several occasions that I suppose in the past couple of weeks, when he has been trying to go through that floodplain, which is a nice shortcut between his home and some other destination he goes to regularly, that he was encountering these bees and it was forcing him to take a different path. So when he told Sev about this...
Sorry, what was Pat a friend of his? Another Pat?
No, it wasn't a human Pat. It was inanimate Pat, an inanimate
Like
Pat on a journey, physical Pat that you walk on.
A path. Sorry. I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue.
Well, I think so. As I say, Pine had told his story, and it had reminded this gentleman Sev of something else, where he said that he had a memory of bees in that area before himself, that he and his younger brother and a couple of friends were once walking through that field, and they heard somebody in these little circle of trees, almost like a fairy fort, whispering, and they couldn't hear what they were saying exactly, but they were teenagers at the time. They made a little bit of noise, and as they drew near, the whispering stopped and was replaced by this buzzing sound, and basically out of the ground at their feet, this swarm of bees and wasps erupted and started to attack and sting the four boys, and they were chased for several hundred meters, and he said that they all had to dive into a nearby river, and it wasn't very deep, so the bees persisted because it was only up to waist height, so they actually had to keep themselves submerged under the water for up to a minute, I think he said, until the swarm had passed. So it's very interesting that they've said that this is something that they've both encountered in the same area at totally different times, a decade or two in between. And both of them, it wasn't clear, but it seemed they both alluded to others having similar stories. So this is a field I'm going to have to investigate. I'm going to have to see what's going on here.
And I do hope you bring the proper protective gear if those bees are on the loose again. And please do not approach a beehive, ladies and gentlemen, without clothes on. I think, Balor, you'll agree with me on that.
I think a lot of it is to do with fear. If you show a bee fear, they will sting you, they will chase you. And if you just have no sudden movements, if you're calm, if everything stays in place, you won't arouse any anger from the bees.
So you are recommending approaching a beehive naked?
Once you approach them in the right way, it shouldn't matter whether you're clothed or naked.
Wise words yet again from Mr. Balor O'Brien. Balor, thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you again. Your words of wisdom, your investigative reporting on the local issues in Lahinch or Ennis. Where was that? Where did that happen?
That was in Ennis.
I'm learning about that beautiful county called Clare on the west coast of Ireland. We must get you down sometime. Yes, not a moment too soon. That's all we have for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for supporting us and for giving us plenty of feedback on where we're going right. There's not much wrong we're doing, I can tell you. We're raising the vibration here on Deep Diving with Malachy Murray.